Thank you for joining us this evening. We will be getting started in just a minute. Let's just go over, you can play around with how you view either the speaker view or the gallery view. So play around with your buttons. We are recording this event. So we can't see you, you can see us. But should you be curious about something we said or want to share this with someone else, you'll be able to do that later. Let's see. Get comfortable with the chat function. Depending on how big your screen is, you might have to click the 3 dots and that say more. We'll be interacting using that chat function. So if you don't know where it is, you might want to try to find it right now. See a hand up. All right, we're going to give it just one more minute and to get folks on. Let's see how many people are on right now. Okay. All right, well, why don't we start working on getting started at least. Okay. Thank you for joining us at the Just Transition Town Hall Reinvest and Sally? What was it called?
It's Re-envision and Reinvest.
And Re-envision in Illinois coal communities. Welcome. Thank you for joining us this evening. You might want to get comfortable with the Zoom chat function. We'll be asking you in just a minute to drop your name and your location so we can see where people are coming from all over the state. It's our hope that we have a good representation from all over the state, as many of the organizers here represent lots of different areas in Illinois. And as we know, Just Transition is going to touch every part of Illinois. And so we're glad to see you here, and we want to know where you're from. You might want to get comfortable with the Zoom tools too. You can play around with the different views, gallery or speaker. We will be sharing some slides, so we'll be going back and forth on that as well. So maybe take a minute and get comfortable with your Zoom buttons if you're not familiar with Zoom. Knowing that if your screen is small, you might need to click the little 3 buttons that say more to find some of these features. And I think we'll get started. Again, drop your name and your location in the chat so we can see where everybody is from. Thank you and welcome for joining us this evening. If you have questions throughout the evening, those can go in the chat as well. So the way this is going to work is that we will have our panelists speak, we'll have a moderated discussion, and then we'll have a Q&A. So if you drop questions in the chat, but you don't hear us read them right away, we will be using them at the very end. So be patient, thank you. And we'll work on those questions for the very end of our time together. But be dropping those in the chat as you think of them, and we'll be watching those and pulling them out for our discussion later. And again, this event is being recorded. You'll be able to see it and share it again later. And we might as well get started. My name is Christina Crost. I'm the Southern Illinois Outreach Coordinator for Faith in Place. We're the Illinois affiliate of Interfaith Power and Light. Where did Sally go? Oh, there you are. Sally will be helping moderate as well this evening. Sally, do you want to introduce yourself?
Hi there. I had an issue with sound. I couldn't hear a thing, so sorry I had to drop out for a second. Hello, everyone. My name is Sally Burgess. I'm an organizer in the downstate area, work for the Illinois chapter of Sierra Club, and I'm located in the Metro East area. Delighted to be here with you tonight. And give me 1 second here, and I will introduce our first panelist. Yes, Christina?
Well, let me give a quick background. So tonight we're going to hear from community leaders and advocates that live and work in communities that are being impacted by the transition away from coal. We're going to hear challenges and opportunities and more about how Illinois has a chance to provide deliberate support for the most impacted communities and workers. First, we'll hear from Amanda Pancaw of Prairie Rivers Network. She's going to give us a lay of the land, explaining how our energy economy is changing in Illinois. Then we'll get some firsthand accounts of impacted communities from Rolf Seibertson, Shama St. Louis, and Dulce Ortiz, who are community leaders in 3 coal plant communities around the state of Illinois. And then we'll hear from Kim Watson of the Illinois Department of Commerce and Economic Development, or Economic Opportunity, excuse me, about the economic opportunity in transitioning to a clean energy economy. And finally, we'll hear from J.C. Kibbe from the Natural Resources Defense Council, who will talk about legislation that can support coal communities and workers going forward. So Sally, why don't you introduce Amanda to us?
I am delighted to do that. Amanda Pancaw is an energy campaign coordinator with Prairie Rivers Network, where she organizes, educates, and advocates for a just and equitable transition to a new clean energy economy. Prairie Rivers Network is an Illinois nonprofit with a mission to protect water, heal land, and inspire change. Amanda has a master's in ecology, and before joining PRN, she lived and worked in Southern Illinois for over a decade, addressing issues of environmental mitigation and reclamation on new, operational, and abandoned coal mines. Welcome, Amanda.
Thank you very much, Sally. And thank you everyone for joining. As I look at our screen or our chat here of where folks are calling in from, we have folks all the way south as Carbondale up to Waukegan. And I'm also struck by a few of the names in the chat, people from places like Energy, Glen Carbon, and again, Carbondale. So even some of our, our towns in Illinois are named for our energy history. And certainly if you're calling in tonight, you might live in a coal community that has an open or closed mine or plant. You're probably seeing how our energy is transitioning. Maybe that's because of changed operations at that facility, or maybe you're seeing new wind or solar develop in your community. So this trend has been underway for over a decade. And since 2007, 37% of US coal plants have closed. And for the first time on record, the US is on track to produce more electricity this year from renewable power than from coal. So falling natural gas prices, an aging coal fleet, falling renewable prices, and pollution and climate concerns have been driving this transition away from coal. Projections show that the coal share of the generation market will soon fall below 20% and potentially drop to 10% or less by 2025. So this map shows just one of the ways that this energy transition is playing out in Illinois. The map on the left shows coal-fired power plants in 2008, with larger circles representing greater generation. And then the map on the right shows plants just last year. And you can see that generation has decreased at many plants, and the solid red circles represent plants that have closed, and the open red circles represent plants that have planned or partial or complete closure. So at the time of that 2018 map, coal was used to generate 40% of electricity in our state, so about half. And by last year, that had fallen to 27%. And over that same decade, we lost half of our coal-fired power plants in Illinois as well. So as coal generation has fallen, deployment of renewables has increased, and Illinois has also began to see a transformation of our energy workforce. Much of this has been spurred by the 2016 passage of the Future Energy Jobs Act. And in 2019, clean energy companies employed more than 125,000 Illinoisans. This was 2 times more than fossil fuel jobs. And these clean energy jobs were growing 5 times faster than statewide employment. So I'd like to kind of take a step back and take a bit of a closer look at how this transition is impacting coal plants, coal mines, coal communities in the state. And then talk a little bit about the challenges that these communities are facing, and then leave you with why Illinois needs to implement solutions to guide what we like to call is a just transition. So Vistra acquired the biggest Illinois coal fleet in April 2018 when they merged with Dynegy. And literally just a week after that merger was complete, the company's CEO was on national television saying that he believed coal is on its way out. And then last fall, Vistra gave communities and workers less than 3 months notice when they announced the closure of the Hennepin, Havana, Duck Creek, and Coffeen coal power stations. They soon later announced that they would be closing the Edwards plant in Peoria, or near Peoria, Bartonville, before 2022 as a result of an air pollution settlement. And this trend is also impacting cooperative and municipal run utilities as well. So the Springfield CWLP, which is City Water, Light and Power, will shutter 2 of its coal units by the end of the year, and a third will be shuttered by October 2023. And the Southern Illinois Power Cooperative, that serves 7 cooperatives and 1 municipality in Southern Illinois, will shutter its largest coal-fired unit by the end of this year also. And Southern Illinois' mining industry has, long faced a boom and bust economy with many peaks and dips, but recently has also been facing a similar downward trend. And last fall, Peabody cited uneconomic mining conditions and gave just 2 months notice with the closure of their Wildcat Hills mine in far Southern Illinois. So unfortunately, to date, this energy transition away from coal in Illinois has been mostly unplanned and disordered. A lot of the decisions about closures and demolition are made in boardrooms without community involvement. Communities and workers often only have a few months notice of closure and no time for advanced planning. And recently we have seen the closure of some of the cleanest burning plants in the state. So certainly if we could involve communities, public health experts in a more planned and orderly transition, we might be able to close some of the most polluting plants first. The immediate and clear impacts of plant closure come in the way of jobs lost at the plant and indirect jobs lost. We've talked to a lot of community leaders across the state and have heard about how the loss of tax revenue is one of their greatest concerns. These municipalities have relied on taxes paid by the coal plants or royalties or other agreements from coal mines to fund their school districts and city and county services. And this is certainly something we'll hear more from Superintendent Seibertson about. And then also communities are, of course, worried about the environmental liability, things like coal ash that are present on these sites. And as we speak, coal plant demolition is occurring at the Crawford plant in Chicago's Little Village, at the Meridosia plant in Morgan County, and at the Wood River plant near Alton, Illinois. These communities are, of course, concerned about adequate cleanup to protect the environment and public health, but they also have high hopes that with proper remediation of these sites, they can be redeveloped into valuable community assets. So there's a saying in the labor movement that transition is assured, justice is not. So we've discussed how the transition to a clean energy economy is already underway in the US and Illinois. And we discussed how coal communities and workers are being most impacted. So if we want a just and equitable transition, Illinois must support the communities and people hit hardest by the move away from coal. We must help them and support them in their efforts to develop sustainable, equitable, and inclusive economic growth. And I'm certainly hoping that tonight's discussion will help elevate this topic and the need for action, and also give us all an idea of what some of the policy solutions might look like. And with that, I do look forward to hearing directly from 3 different leaders from coal communities across the state. Thank you.
Thank you, Amanda. All right, let's keep moving. Let's talk to one of those community leaders. I'd like to introduce for you Rolf Seibertson, the superintendent of the Canton Union School District 66. Canton is about 30 miles west of Peoria and is home to the now shuttered Duck Creek coal plant. Mr. Seibertson has a school board meeting he's preparing for right now. And so he will be unable to stay for the Q&A later, but should you have any questions for him specifically, we will get them to him by email and we'll get you an answer later. So thank you, Mr. Seibertson, for your time. We know that it is precious and you have the floor, sir.
Thank you very much, Christina and Amanda. Thank you very much for such a eloquently and informative opening. As stated, my name is Rolf Seibertson. I'm superintendent of Canton Schools. I've been in my position for 5 years. Prior to that, I was in the Midland School District for 16 years. Overall, I've been in education for 33 years. At the outset, I would agree with Kurt Morgan's assessment, who is the CEO of Vistra. Coal is definitely on its way out. And I don't think anybody would disagree with a move from fossil fuel energy to renewable clean energy. I think, in fact, the entire world is probably moving towards that. And I would also agree with Amanda's statement that transition, at least in Illinois, has been poorly planned. For example, about a year ago, last October, we received a cryptic email from Vistra PR person, Brad Watson, informing us that they were going to conduct a community meeting. Within that meeting, they announced that they were going to close 4 plants, one of which was located in Canton, the Duck Creek plant. During that meeting, they also insinuated that they were going to build a solar farm or battery storage facility on the Duck Creek site, later to learn that there was nothing in the legislation that they had written themselves committing to do that. But probably what was most disappointing and what was very traumatic to our community was the loss of $2 million in local tax revenue. In our school district alone, it's about $800,000 to $900,000. And what Vistra allegedly proposed was to replace it with a solar farm or a battery storage facility that would produce about 50% or recover 50% of that loss in revenue. Biggest problem to us was the fact that it would force us to cut programs, excuse me, possibly teaching staff. And we had no forewarning of this. Similarly, there was nothing in place in the state legislature or in the bill that Vistra had written themselves, which was the Coal to Solar Energy Storage Act, for any funding to make up that loss in tax revenue. So it has been very traumatic and disappointing for us as this has transpired.
Thank you very much for that. We hear about just transition, but it is not until we hear from communities like yours, experiences like yours, that it really comes home and we really understand what we're dealing with here. Thank you so much for your contribution tonight. And we understand that you're going to have to leave us early, so we'll send you any questions that are geared just for you.
I apologize for that.
Not a problem. We should have checked with you first. It's my pleasure to introduce our next panelist, Shama St. Louis. Shama is a mother, leader, entrepreneur, communicator, activist, advocate, award-winning community organizer, and now candidate for political office in Peoria. Peoria is home to the Edwardsville coal plant that Amanda told us about a little earlier. It's scheduled for closure by 2022. Shama spent 12 years at the Illinois Black Chamber of Commerce and became their youngest president, and also the chairwoman of the Peoria Black Chamber of Commerce. She's currently a community organizer for the Peoria People's Project, which is an extension of the Grassroots Collective, Collaborative. She's the founder of the Black Justice Project and the communications director for Change Peoria, and she also serves on several local boards. Ms. St. Louis will also be unable to stay for the Q&A, so any questions for her specifically will be emailed to her afterwards. And welcome, Shama, to the conversation.
Thank you, Sally. We are ready for a future we all deserve, a future that is equitable with clean energy in Illinois. Particularly, we are ready for this future in poor and Black communities. We talk about environmental justice, but I want to make sure that everyone joining tonight is clear that environmental justice is also racial justice. Too often, environmental pollution hits Black and poor neighborhoods the hardest. Fossil fuel power plants contribute to global warming, pollute our environment, and harm our health. They also disproportionately harm Black, Indigenous people of color, Black, Indigenous, and people of color, as well as low-income households. When I decided to become a board member of the Sierra Club, I did so because I realized that a large part of my social justice work to build equity was not inclusive of equity in environmental issues. As a Black person who grew up in poor areas of town and later developed asthma as an adult, which I'm actually struggling with today, I had no idea that this was because I too was a victim of environmental inequity. In my naivety, I thought that developing asthma was something that just happened to me as an adult because both my mother and my sister had pretty bad asthma. So I just figured it was genetics. I would have never imagined that growing up in a disadvantaged neighborhood most likely contributed to my restricted lung capacity as an adult. So I commend the Sierra Club for being more intentional about centering racial equity in the center of their environmental justice fights. And it is because of their work and the work of Ryan Hidden, who is the organizer here in Peoria, that I became knowledgeable about how important it is to acknowledge the intersection between racial and environmental justice. More than half of Illinois coal plants have closed since 2009, with no planning or priority given to closing plants that are responsible for the majority of adverse health effects. For example, the Duck Creek Power Station in Canton had more modern pollution controls, and Vistra closed it in 2019 over the Edwards coal plant. I'd also like to mention that the Edwards coal plant is scheduled for closure, and the settlement forced the companies to reinvest in the community to address health and spur new clean energy jobs. While this is great news, those funds aren't the answers to the challenges that coal plants closures will bring over the next 2 to 3 years. We need a strong plan for when the other coal plants close, and they will all close, and that plan is the Clean Energy Jobs Act. Thank you so much for hearing me out today and hearing my story. And I am looking forward to continue work on environmental justice issues as we tackle racial inequity here in Peoria.
Thank you so much, Shama. We appreciate you being here, and even while you're suffering from the effects of what happens when we don't invest in our communities, when we don't take environmental justice seriously. And so thank you so much for being with us today and sharing about what that's like. It is my pleasure to introduce next Dulce Ortiz. Dulce has worked tirelessly with Clean Power Lake County since 2013 after learning about the pollution from the Waukegan coal plant and how it contributed to poor air quality in Waukegan. Having a mother suffering from asthma, she understood the dangers of coal pollution and what it could do to someone's quality of life. Dulce became even more determined to educate her community about the impacts of local coal pollution. Dulce's passion and dedication come from believing in community involvement, helping and speaking up for those in need. Every day, she is grateful to God for giving her faith, courage, and strength to have the opportunity to work for a healthy and clean energy future for her children, Ivan and Soleil, and future generations to come. Dulce, you have the floor.
Thank you, Christina. First of all, I just want to thank you all for putting this together. And I want to thank all of those that are joining us for making time to learn about just transitions and also learn from individuals like myself that, live in a community that, could have just have clean air and clean water, but that unfortunately we're dealing with toxic polluters in our communities, and therefore we find the need to create and build up grassroots support, not only for our communities, but we understand that at the end of the day, this is the benefit for the entire state of Illinois, but also for the nation, right? The less polluters we have, the better environment we're going to have, the better environment we're going to leave for our children. So I'm one of the co-chairs for Clean Power Lake County. Clean Power Lake County is a community-driven coalition committed to local action to secure environmental, economic, and racial justice. It is supported by several partners, including environmental, faith, and public health organizations. Members of Clean Power Lake County advocate for a long-term retirement plan for the coal fire plant here in Waukegan, including a just transition for the workforce, the tax base, and the lakefront site. We also work to promote clean energy projects that can create new local jobs and tax revenues for Waukegan, but also Lake County. I have been a resident of Waukegan for over 25 years and have dedicated my life to serving my community. Unfortunately, my community here in Waukegan has a painful history of industrial pollution and contamination. Industrial corporations made their profits for many years on our lakefront and then abruptly left our community, along with a long legacy of contamination, which we are currently still spending our tax dollars trying to clean up. The lack of transition planning as these companies exited our community resulted in massive job loss and tax base, which economically depressed our community. And the extensive contamination has left sites in years of remediation efforts, and now with limited options for reuse. The state of Illinois has 11 Superfund sites, and Waukegan is home to 5 of those Superfund sites. Our families in our community are minorities, low to moderate income, who don't always have access to quality health care nor preventative care. Minority and economically disadvantaged communities are disproportionately burdened by pollution, and Waukegan community is no different. On top of all the sources of pollution, my community is exposed to, and we also have the largest source of air and water pollution here in the county in our backyard, which is the energy coal plant. After its previous owners, Midwest Generation, went into bankruptcy, Energy purchased Midwest Generation as a subsidiary along with its Illinois coal plant fleet, which included the Waukegan plant. The plant was built in the 1920s, so it's very, very old, and it currently operates boilers that are over 50 years old. The coal power plant hurts the health of our communities in Lake County, but particularly Waukegan. Sad to say that unfortunately, a study found that as many as 1 in 3 children in Waukegan suffer from asthma or asthma-like symptoms. I myself have asthma, and also my mother. And so we know what we're up against. We know that this has been a long history of pollution in Waukegan, and as Waukegan residents, now we understand that we can't wait, that we have to be proactive and not reactive. And so as Clean Power Lake County has advocated for a very long time, we want to secure a retirement date for the coal fire plant in Waukegan. We want to establish a just transition plan for local workers, including retraining for jobs in the renewable energy economy. We want to collaborate with stakeholders in productive conversations about the sale and reuse of the coal plant's lakefront site. Obviously, we don't want, for the coal plant to be retired and then have a gas, natural gas plant come in. We want to identify opportunities for energy efficiency and clean energy projects that can create jobs for local residents and tax revenue for Waukegan. We also want to develop intergenerational leadership that sustains communities, our community's self-determination. And so why do we need state level action? Well, for years, Clean Power Lake County tried to work with our elected officials to no avail. Unfortunately, our local elected officials have not listened to our needs when it comes to having basic human rights of having clean air and clean water. And for this reason, we shifted our focus to do more work on the state level. And that's why we're super excited for the Clean Energy Jobs Act. We know that Clean Energy Jobs Act, CEJA, addresses the urgent needs that provide aid to communities of color, especially since we have disproportionately impacted by COVID-19. We need a significant change, and we need significant new reforms to put an end to also utility-friendly policies in Illinois. And so CEJA will bring to Waukegan a just transition for the coal plant. We're excited because it supports fossil fuel workers and communities for a just transition to a clean energy economy. It also would transition the Illinois power sector completely away from fossil fuels by 2030. And also CEJA creates clean jobs for climate justice, creating a diverse and equitable clean energy workforce. CEJA recognizes and addresses structural, historical, and institutional barriers faced by marginalized communities and directs workforce development resources to counteract those barriers and benefit marginalized job seekers. And it also supports capacity market reform for cleaner, cheaper energy reserves for Northern Illinois. We know that the energy coal plant, it's only operational because we as electricity payers, we are subsidizing this coal plant. And so we're super excited for CEJA for a just transition. And, for the Waukegan residents, this is something that it's really great needed, not only for us, but also environmental justice communities.
Thank you, Dulce. Thank you so much. Listening to you, it just makes so much sense that this Clean Energy Jobs Act would become the law in the regulations, the legislation in Illinois, and makes me wonder why we haven't gotten there yet. I hope you can stay around and join us for the discussion afterwards. Thank you so much. Next, we're going to hear from Kim Watson. Kim is the Senior Account Manager, and this is a mouthful, for the Illinois Department of Commerce and Economic Opportunity Regional Economic Development, Southern Region. Kim has been with the agency since 2004. She is a graduate of Murray State University with a Bachelor of Science in Business and Journalism. She serves on the Rural Partners Board and is a lifelong resident of Southern Illinois, and she lives near Harrisburg with her family. Welcome, Kim, to the conversation.
Thank you. And thank you, Christina, for running the slides for me. The first couple are just going to be a commercial for the agency, and I'll try and do those quickly. This is just the map of how our agency breaks down the regions. I work in this area in the bottom in the blue, which is the 19 southern counties. And then this is the contact for all of the regions if you need anything there. So we can go to the next slide, please. And within the agency, there's it breaks out to about 5 areas that we work in: community development, workforce development, economic development, film, and tourism, Main Street type programs. And there's over 40 programs that fall within these areas. And so I won't cover all of them, but that's about how they break out. So next slide, please. And then to get into what I'm going to talk about tonight, the last year we issued a 5-year economic development plan. It's almost a year old. It can be found at this website, and it focused on the key industries of agribusiness and ag tech, and energy, information technology, life science and healthcare, manufacturing, and transportation and logistics. Next slide, please. And this slide's pretty busy, but I wanted to include that. This breaks out those areas, and what this shows you is the number of jobs in these specific categories in 2018. Then it shows you how that employment was changed between the past 10 years, and then go projections forward of what's projected over from 2016 through to 2026. So that can give you an idea of what would be the major categories going forward. And within and each region is a little different within the state, but these are the major categories that are focused on. And like for instance, in the southern region, energy is one of the higher categories in my region. So that one doesn't rate as high statewide, but it is high in the southern region. Healthcare is one that is fairly high, I believe, high in every region. We can go to the next slide because I think that shows all of the regions. So this is how they break out across the state. The very dark purple, those are the highest numbers of jobs per region on average for each category. So like in my region, energy jobs do rate the highest. Based on this category, these were probably based more on the coal and oil production. But probably if that number was looked at today, that would be a different number because there's been a lot of layoffs in those industries. One of the, those wages that come from those jobs are hard to replace because they are very high paying jobs. Now, the challenge we have is replaced with those coming in from the wind and solar and trying to train folks for those jobs to replace those coming out of the coal mine, and hoping that they will have a job or have an industry there to go into. And but one of the issues is so far that there hasn't been enough demand for all of them, and hoping that will increase. So like in the southern region, the other high ranking positions are in agriculture and healthcare and manufacturing. Manufacturing, we could also manufacture parts for wind turbines or things like that. So those are things that we could also be looking at and think about how we can impact the clean energy sectors. So that, you know, that's one avenue that we could take as an avenue to be thinking about. So next slide, please. These are some strategies that have been identified in the plan. Investing in clean energy research, investing in broadband. Part of our Rebuild Illinois has been investing in the broadband and capital in expanding broadband, and that has already started taking place. There's been a couple of rounds already, and more of that is set to take place. Investment in electric vehicle infrastructures plan, building innovation labs, expanding the career pathways, that's strengthening our workforce initiatives. That's already taking place. Again, those would be preparing our workforce to build turbines, do those kind of things. Those are all things we could do. Working with the small business innovation research. I know the University of Illinois Extension has done some work with that, as well as the Southern Illinois University at Carbondale has done some work with that. Next slide, please. And I guess that was the end of it. I know as far as some of the other issues related back to the loss of the jobs, being hard to replace those wages, I know some with the loss with the jobs in the workforce, we've had, it also brings some health issues. They've identified some drug use that's been linked to injuries in the mines. Those are just some things that I'm aware of. So that's about all I have for you tonight.
All right. Thank you so much, Kim, for sharing that information. It's really interesting. I hadn't seen that graphic that broke it into the different regions before. If we wanted to find that document or that graphic again, is there a way you could put that in the chat for us to take a look at?
I can. It was also on my slide, and you'd be happy.
I can do that
with the participants as well.
All right, I will do that in momentarily. So thank you again for sharing the information about, you know, what a just transition could look like for jobs and how it could be just a huge driver in lots of different regions of the state, really statewide. So thank you again, Kim. And I'm going to introduce now J.C. Kibbe. J.C. Kibbe is the Illinois Climate and Clean Energy Advocate for the Natural Resources Defense Council, or NRDC, where his work includes policy development, campaign strategy, legislative advocacy, and public engagement. He previously worked for the Union of Concerned Scientists and Service Employees International Union, and currently serves on the boards of the Illinois Sierra Club and Illinois Environmental Council. He holds a master's in public policy from Northwestern University and a bachelor's in political theory from Michigan State University. Go Spartans. He grew up in Michigan near 3 coal-fired power plants. JC, the floor is yours, and I'm going to work on putting that link in the chat.
Great, thanks so much, Christina. And thanks everybody for joining us tonight. I'm gonna use like 10 seconds of my time just because we've all been sitting on the Zoom call for 45 minutes to encourage everybody just take a minute and like stretch a little bit and move, because sometimes these calls can get like can be long. So please take that moment for yourself. I know that I pay more attention if I'm feeling limber and energized. Okay. So thanks so much again, Christina, and glad to be here. And as you said in the introduction, I grew up, with 3 coal plants within 3 miles of my house, and so like many of the panelists, this issue is very personal to me, and I felt some of those health impacts growing up. But I also saw in my hometown what it can be like to see a success story where one of those coal plants was ultimately turned into an office, LEED certified downtown, and became kind of a jewel of the city. So, there's hope in all that too. So I'm here to talk a little bit about some of the policy solutions to move us forward in Illinois on a just transition. You've heard a couple other folks here talk about the Clean Energy Jobs Act, and if I can get my slideshow to work, I will talk a bit about it. Okay, how's this? Can folks see my screen okay?
Yes, we can see it.
Okay, great. So I'm going to start just by giving a little bit of the context that other folks have to show that coal is on its way out. It has been for a while. This graph is consistent with what you've been hearing from everybody else. If you look at coal jobs in Illinois, the graph looks really similar. And in fact, even before the decline of coal, in terms of the share of its power sector, the number of jobs in the coal industry had been going down for decades anyway, just because of automation. So this is not a new phenomenon, but this is sort of the latest volley in what has been really a decades-long decline in jobs in the coal industry. So I'm going to talk now a little bit about how we came up with what's in the Clean Energy Jobs Act, what is in the Clean Energy Jobs Act, and importantly, how we're going to pay for that. So let's just dive right in. Amanda referenced earlier that coal plant closure decisions are often made in boardrooms. And in the case of Illinois, those are boardrooms that are in other states, in New Jersey and in Texas, for the case of NRG and Vistra. And those aren't rooms that you or I or the people who live in the towns that are affected actually get to sit in. And so we wanted to take exactly the opposite approach with the Clean Energy Jobs Act. So we went to every corner of the state doing what was called our Listen, Lead, Share initiative. So I believe every Senate district in the state of Illinois, we sat down in church basements, in schools, in business meeting spaces, and we asked people what they wanted to see in Illinois' energy future. So, you've heard the metaphor about in Illinois, stuff gets written in a smoke-filled room, right? Well, we wanted this, again, to be the furthest thing from that. So after we had all those meetings, more than 100 across the state, we took to heart what we had heard from folks in those meetings. And one of the consistent themes was supporting the workers and communities impacted by the transition away from coal. And not only that, but that, that transition should be paid for by the polluters who have benefited and profited for decades from the running of these plants, even as they were impacting the health of the people who lived in those communities. And even as when their profits dried up, they were leaving the people and the workers high and dry. So there's a lot of text on all these slides, and I'm not going to read every single line word by word, because that's really a boring way to do a slideshow, but I'm going to give a bit of an overview, and then I would encourage folks to take a look at these slides as I go to see some of the details. But overall, we wanted that just transition to include, first, workers who are left without jobs when these plants close. We want to make sure that they can continue to have health insurance, that they have a place to go for training to find their next opportunities. We wanted to support communities. You heard from Superintendent Seibertson earlier that property taxes are really important, particularly for schools. And we heard loud and clear that the lights need to stay on and the teachers need to stay in the classrooms in these communities where plants close, that's really important. And so we included provisions to address taxes in there. And finally, support for the local economy. Every plant is different, but in some places, especially in more rural communities, the coal plant can be a really big part of the local economy. And while we're not going to make up all of that overnight when a plant closes, we understand that if there's going to be a just transition, economic opportunity long term, and we've tried to do that, particularly through clean energy. So here's a bit more detail on some of the things that we do to support workers. This displaced energy worker bill of rights, I think, is particularly important. Again, going to piggyback off something Amanda said, which is that these plants are often closed down with very little notice. I think in the case of Duck Creek and the other plants that were shuttered last year, there was like 90 days from the time the announcement was made until the time that people actually started getting laid off. We think it needs to be longer. We think that both for the workers and for the community to do this planning takes longer. So we're asking for 2 years advance notice if those closures are going to happen. And also that, workers continue to retain their health insurance for a year while they, look for another job or whatever they want to, do in that time. We also, we want to create opportunities for these workers in the clean energy economy, but we also acknowledge that not everybody who's working in a coal plant and that plant closes necessarily wants to go build wind farms. We don't think we need to be prescriptive. We don't think that people in Chicago or in Springfield need to decide what the next career of somebody's going to be when a coal plant closes. And so we designed this bill in a way to create options for those workers. So if you want to get into an entrepreneurship program or a workforce training program to go be a part of the clean energy economy, to put up wind turbines and solar panels, that's cool. And we're going to prioritize you to get into those workforce training programs. If you're near the end of your career and maybe you want to just take a buyout package and retire, we want to provide retirement and financial planning assistance. And if you want to go do something else entirely, CEJA proposes that displaced fossil fuel workers would get a scholarship to any public university in Illinois that they wanted to go get trained for the next step in their career. And finally, we want to provide tax credits for employers to hire in these clean energy empowerment zones, as we call them, are areas around where the plants actually close. So to provide economic incentives for employers to move to some of these towns. And oftentimes once they get there, they realize that there's a lot more, assets, more people, more social capital than they realize, but it's helpful to get them there first with those incentives. For communities, again, the property tax piece is really important here and it's pretty straightforward. Anywhere a plant closes under the Clean Energy Jobs Act, we want to provide replacement for that tax-based revenue for school districts like Rolf's for 5 years so that they have time to plan for the transition of their budget and have money to make that up in the meantime. We also have a community energy and climate planning program, and there's some funding for that comes elsewhere in the bill. And once again, acknowledging that the transition away from fossil fuels is not a one-size-fits-all approach. So this is an opportunity for those communities with some state funding to make their own decisions through a stakeholder process about what the clean energy future looks like for them. Maybe that means solar panels on City Hall. Maybe that means a bike share program. Maybe that means more charging stations for heavy duty electric vehicles. It's going to depend, but again, we want to create a process where communities can make their own decisions about that future. Finally, local economies. Again, the tax credits here are important, and from the perspective of the electric grid, a lot of the places where these coal plants are located actually have a lot of interconnection that makes it easy to get new energy assets up and running more affordably than they might be able to in other places. So if you've already got a big interconnection where that coal plant used to be, it can make a lot of sense to put a solar panel or wind farm or batteries nearby because they already have that grid access. You don't have to pay to build it all new. And so on top of that natural asset in the infrastructure, we also create tax credits for developing renewable energy projects in these areas and some more conventional economic development funding. So how's all this managed? Again, this was based on feedback from folks that we talked to who had actually worked on implementing economic development programs. And rather than have somebody like the Illinois EPA do it, who good people over there, they do good work. We recognize that this is economic development, not just environmental protection, and that the most appropriate place for that is the Department of Commerce and Economic Opportunity, who already has experience, as you heard from our last panelist, supporting economic development. And so we don't want to try and reinvent the wheel. We gave that responsibility to them. And again, all those needs are going to be different, and so that's part of DCEO's job, is figuring out how to meet those needs in different communities. And finally, tracking all this with metrics, because you can't improve what you don't track, as the saying goes. So how's it paid for? As I said at the beginning, we heard loud and clear that the polluters who have realized the profits from these plants are the ones who should have to pay to make things right, or as right as we can, with these communities. And so there's two ways that we do that, and the money goes into what's called our Energy Community Reinvestment Fund. And I'm not going to list everything here, but essentially all the transition programs that I just talked about are funded through this fund. Two ways. a pollution fee, and a coal severance tax. The pollution fee, we determine the amount that all these programs cost. It's about $210 million, and that fee is just spread around to all the plants to where they're assessed a small fee on their pollution to pay for that. We don't anticipate that this is going to drive bills up because it's a very small level, but it is enough to support these transition programs, acknowledging as well that it's not just carbon that warms the planet that we need to account for, although that is important, but also other co-pollutants that harm people's health. Finally, coal severance fee. Illinois is one of the largest coal mining states in the nation. I think we're number 5 or 6. And almost all the other states that mine a lot of coal already have a fee like this. So we're a little behind on this. And that includes a lot of states that you don't necessarily think of as, hippy dippy enviro states. You got West Virginia, Kentucky, Wyoming, Tennessee. This is just a smart way to get revenue from the state. And we want to start doing that in Illinois to fund these programs. So here's the overall budget. I know that, digging into the details of budgets aren't necessarily everybody's favorite thing, but for folks who are interested, you can really see that all laid out. We think about half of that comes from the pollutant fee, half of it from the coal severance tax. So both of those are clocking a little over $100 million a year. We're not really here to talk about the whole picture in the Clean Energy Jobs Act, but for folks that are interested, here's a couple of the other things that we're doing in the Act. Cleaning up our transportation sector as well as our power sector, expanding energy efficiency. I saw a gentleman in the chat ask about that, and focusing on consumers' bills and keeping those low as well. Don't have a ton of time because I'm running short here to talk about Brownfield Solar, but just to say, when we talk about repurposing these coal plant sites and putting solar on them, Brownfield Solar is the way you do that. There's an existing program for Brownfield Solar in the state. We think there's a lot of opportunity there. What we don't think is necessarily a solution to this is the bill that Vistra has proposed that Superintendent Seibertson referred to earlier. You see at the bottom, that bill is giving a lot of money to Vistra that's going on all of our bills just to give them money to run these plants. We think that that money should go to communities and workers to help people get better opportunities, to get back on their feet, to keep our schools open, not to go to big out-of-state companies like Vistra. So we think that that is a false solution, and that CEJA is really the whole package there. So thanks so much for your time, and look forward to chatting with folks more in the Q&A session.